The mountains remember what men try to forget. Blood spilled into dust doesn't wash away with time. It seeps deeper, hardening into something unforgiving. Like the widow who stands on her porch each evening, staring at the jagged peaks with eyes gone cold as winter stone. 5 years. 5 years since they brought her a badge and a folded flag but no body to bury. 5 years of whispered condolences that gradually faded to silence. 5 years of her loading that revolver in the dark of maps spread across floorboards of traps laid with the patience of a hunter who knows her prey will eventually come. They never saw her in the shadows of the mine learning to kill with the same methodical precision she once used to bake bread. They never noticed how she measured distances with her eyes, cataloging weaknesses, building an arsenal of vengeance beneath her floorboards. They say grief changes a person. They have no idea how right they are. Now they've taken her sister, their last mistake. The dust gathered on the wooden counter, like it gathered on everything else in Redemption Creek. Sarah Blackwood ran the cloth over the surface with the mechanical precision that had become her hallmark. 5 years had taught her how to move through life without truly being in it, an existence marked by routine silence and the hollow echo of what might have been. The bell above the door jingled, breaking the afternoon quiet of the general store. Mrs. Blackwood. Sheriff James Cooper stood silhouetted in the doorframe, his badge catching the afternoon light. He removed his hat, revealing sandy hair and a face that seemed perpetually apologetic in her presence. Sheriff, Sarah nodded, continuing to wipe the counter. At 38, she wore her auburn hair tied back severely, her green eyes sharp but distant, as if focusing on something others couldn't see. Just checking in. Haven't seen you at the town meeting about the railway expansion. Sarah tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Not much for meetings these days. Cooper stepped further inside, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. 5 years is a long time to keep to yourself, Sarah. Her hand stilled on the counter. 5 years. The exact measurement of her grief, marked with the precision of a ruler against time. 5 years since Marshall had kissed her goodbye, placed his hand on her swollen belly, and walked out the door for the last time. Was there something you needed, Sheriff? Her voice remained even practiced in the art of deflection. Cooper sighed. Just wanted to say your sister's been doing real fine at the infirmary. Doc Miller says she's the best nurse he's had. The mention of Clara brought the ghost of a smile to Sarah's face, her one concession to emotion. She always wanted to help people. Must be nice having her here these past months. Sarah nodded. Clara's presence was more than nice. It was necessary, a tether to humanity when everything else had slipped away. Her younger sister had arrived 6 months ago, fresh from nursing the wounded during the war, still believing in the fundamental goodness of people, despite everything she'd seen. After Cooper left, Sarah locked the store early. From beneath the counter, she retrieved Marshall's pocket watch, stopped at 3:17, the estimated time of his death. The gold case was dented from the impact of the bullet that should have been stopped by his chest instead. The glass was cracked, the hands frozen in time, just like her. The 2-mile walk to her cabin at the edge of town was a ritual Sarah performed in all weather. Today, the mountains loomed purple and imposing against the darkening sky, the old mining tunnels cutting through them like scars, reminders of broken promises and abandoned dreams. Her husband's family had owned the largest silver mine in the territory before it ran dry. When Marshall became sheriff, it was supposed to be temporary until they found something better. But there was never anything better, not in Redemption Creek. Just dust promises and eventually blood. Jum. You sure this is safe? Clara's voice echoed from the depths of the old mining tunnel where Sarah had been spending her mornings for the past 4 years. Sarah checked the trip wire, adjusted its tension against a row of bells that would sound if disturbed. It's just practice, Clara. Her sister's blonde head emerged from the darkness, her hands dusty from the limestone walls. At 28, Clara was Sarah's opposite, open, trusting, her face animated with expressions Sarah had long ago schooled out of her own. Practice for what exactly? The coming apocalypse. Clara's teasing hid genuine concern. Sarah didn't answer. How could she explain that after Marshall's death, after losing their unborn child to grief and shock, she had made a decision that while the town believed she was simply a broken widow running a store, she had been systematically preparing for something else entirely? You know, there hasn't been a robbery in Redemption Creek since... Clara trailed off, catching herself. Since Marshall was killed protecting the gold shipment, Sarah finished for her. That's what happens when you kill a sheriff. Scares away the amateurs, leaves only the professionals. Sarah, I'm just being practical. Woman living alone needs protection. Sarah moved past her sister, walking deeper into the tunnel where makeshift targets were set up. From the holster hidden beneath her skirt, she drew a Smith & Wesson revolver, smaller than Marshall's service weapon, but deadly accurate in her hands after countless hours of practice. Clara watched as Sarah fired 6 shots in quick succession, each one finding its mark in the center of the target's silhouette. "Dear Lord," Clara whispered, "when did you learn to shoot like that?" Sarah ejected the spent casings. Tuesday afternoons, mostly. Later, as they rode back to town, Clara studied her sister's profile against the setting sun. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right? About Marshall, about the baby." Sarah kept her eyes on the trail. "Some things don't need talking about." "Maybe they do." Clara reached across to touch Sarah's arm. "Maybe that's exactly what they need." Sarah looked at her sister, really looked at her for the first time that day. Clara had been 16 when Sarah married Marshall and left home. Now she was a grown woman who had seen the worst of humanity during the war, yet somehow maintained her capacity for hope, for healing. "I'll make stew tonight," Sarah said, changing the subject. Clara sighed, but didn't push. "I have to check on old Mrs. Peterson first. Her fever was high this morning. I'll be home by 7. Sarah nodded, already calculating. 7 meant Clara would take the north trail past the creek. 7 meant darkness would be settling in. 7 meant risk. "Take the main road instead," Sarah said casually. "They're blasting in the western tunnel. Might spook your horse if you go by the creek. It's 20 minutes longer. Better late than never arriving at all." It was a phrase Marshall used to say. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. 7 o'clock came and went. At 7:30, Sarah placed Clara's bowl on the table and sat alone with her stew, watching the minute hand on the wall clock circle with maddening slowness. At 8, she was at the stable saddling her horse. At 8:15, she was galloping toward Mrs. Peterson's cabin, her heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. The old woman answered on the third knock, her rheumy eyes widening at the sight of Sarah's strained face. "Clara," Sarah asked without preamble. "Left at sundown, dear. Said she needed to get home to you." Sarah was back on her horse before Mrs. Peterson could ask any questions. The night air whipped her face as she rode first down the main road, then cutting across to the creek trail when she found no sign of her sister. Near the bend where the creek widened, she found Clara's horse riderless, the medical bag still attached to the saddle. Sarah dismounted, her fingers automatically checking the weight of the revolver at her hip. The ground told the story. Her heart already knew multiple horses. Men's boots, signs of a struggle. Clara had been taken. But instead of panic, Sarah felt a cold clarity descend. She knelt, examining the tracks more carefully, noting the distinctive pattern of one horseshoe chipped at the corner, leaving a mark like a crescent moon in the dirt. She'd seen that track before in reports from nearby counties. The Raven Gang. Sarah stood, brushing the dirt from her hands. For a moment, she remained perfectly still, staring at the point where the hoof prints disappeared into the tree line. Then she mounted her horse and rode not in pursuit but back to her cabin. Inside, she moved with methodical efficiency. From beneath a floorboard under her bed, she retrieved a wooden box. The hinges creaked as she opened it, revealing not family heirlooms but tools of a different sort: a folding knife with a bone handle, a set of lockpicks, a small brass telescope, and at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, Marshall's service revolver, a Colt Peacemaker she'd claimed was lost during the attack. From another hiding place came a leather-bound journal filled with maps, notes, and diagrams she'd been compiling for 4 years. On the first page, written in her neat hand, Operation Thorn. As she gathered supplies, ammunition, dried food, medical supplies, water, there was no tremble in her fingers, no panic in her movements, only the mechanical precision of a plan long rehearsed, finally being executed. When the knock came at her door, an hour later, Sarah had already changed into dark trousers and a fitted jacket that allowed for easier movement. She slid the revolver into her waistband at the small of her back before answering. Sheriff Cooper stood on her porch, hat in hand again, his face grave in the lamplight. "Mrs. Blackwood, Sarah, I'm afraid I have bad news." She weighted her face, a careful mask. "Your sister Clara, she's been taken. A ransom note was delivered to my office." He extended a folded piece of paper. "They're asking for $5,000. Say they know about the old Blackwood mine." Sarah took the note, scanning its contents without surprise. "We have the nurse. 5,000 in gold. Northern tunnel entrance. Midnight tomorrow. Come alone or she dies. We know about the hidden shaft. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I've sent for help from the county seat, but they won't arrive in time. Cooper stepped closer. I'll gather what men I can, but you should know. It's the Raven gang. They've killed before. Sarah refolded the note carefully. I know who they are, Sheriff. Cooper's brow furrowed. Sarah, what are you planning? Well, whatever it is, don't. These men are dangerous. Let me handle this. A ghost of a smile touched Sarah's lips. I appreciate your concern, Sheriff, but right now I need to figure out how to get $5,000 by tomorrow night. Sarah. Good night, Sheriff. She closed the door before he could argue further. Alone, Sarah unfolded the ransom note again, her finger tracing the signature at the bottom, not a name but the crude drawing of a raven. Her eyes drifted to Marshall's pocket watch on the table, its hand still pointing to 3:17. I'm sorry, Clara, she whispered to the empty room, but they were always going to take you. From her pocket, she withdrew a small metal device, a rudimentary transmitter she'd adapted from designs in a scientific journal. The corresponding receiver had been sewn into the lining of Clara's medical bag months ago, activated by a pressure switch when removed from the horse's saddle. The needle on the device quivered, then pointed steadily northwest toward the abandoned Blackwood mining complex in the high country, precisely where Sarah had spent years preparing for this moment. She had lied to the sheriff. She wasn't planning to get the ransom money. She was planning to get her sister back and leave no one alive to regret taking her. Dawn found Sarah already deep in the pine forest that climbed the mountain slopes. The receiver in her hand guided her, its needle pointing unerringly toward the tunnels where men had once sought fortune, but now harbored those who stole it. She'd taken a circuitous route, avoiding the main trails where Cooper might post men to intercept her. The sheriff meant well, but his interference would only complicate her carefully constructed plan, a plan that had been forming in her mind since the day they buried Marshall with military honors and empty promises of justice. Near noon, she reached the vantage point she'd selected years ago, a rocky outcropping overlooking the northern entrance to the mining complex. Through the brass telescope, she studied the camp below. 7 men visible armed, moving with the confidence of those who believed themselves hunters rather than prey. Sarah checked the receiver again. Clara was inside, deep in the tunnel network, alive if the steady signal was any indication. She settled in to wait, cataloging each man, noting their patterns. The tall one with the limp who smoked incessantly. The wiry youth who seemed to be the lookout. The broad-shouldered man whose authoritative gestures marked him as a lieutenant, if not the leader himself. None matched the description of Eric the Raven, the gang's elusive chief, a man whose face no witness had lived to properly describe. A man whose brutality had become legend in the 3 states where he operated. As the sun began its descent, Sarah moved. Not toward the camp, but along the ridge to the eastern slope where a secondary entrance to the mine lay concealed by years of rockfall, an entrance that didn't appear on any official maps, but had been shown to her by Marshall during their courtship. Family secret, he'd told her with a wink. Might come in handy someday. Sarah wondered if he'd ever imagined just how handy it would become. The narrow tunnel was partially collapsed, requiring her to crawl on hands and knees for the first 50 feet. Cobwebs clung to her hair, and the musty scent of earth filled her nostrils. But Sarah pressed on, guided by memory, and the beam of a small lantern. She allowed herself, once she was deep enough, that its light wouldn't be visible from outside. The tunnel eventually widened, opening into a network of passages she had explored and mapped meticulously in the years following Marshall's death. On the wall at each junction, she found the small marks she'd left, innocuous scratches to the untrained eye, but a navigational system for her alone. 2 hours of careful movement brought her to the section of tunnel directly beneath the northern camp. Voices filtered down through a ventilation shaft, rough men's laughter, the clink of bottles, fragments of conversation. Told you the widow would pay. Shut up about the money, boss says we wait. Why's he so interested in this one anyway? Just a nurse. You know why. It's not about the sister, it's about her. Sarah froze, her breath catching. They weren't just after money, they were after her. A new voice joined the conversation, softer, more cultured, with an underlying steel that silenced the others immediately. Gentlemen, our guest is trying to rest. Perhaps we could lower our voices. The Raven himself, Sarah realized. here personally for what should have been a routine kidnapping and ransom. Sorry, boss, came a mumbled response. Cooper assured me the widow will come alone. When she does remember, no harm comes to her. That's not negotiable. Sarah's mind raced. Cooper, the sheriff, had been in contact with the gang, and the leader wanted her unharmed. Why she had no time to process these revelations. The plan needed adjustment. Rather than bypassing the camp entirely as she'd intended, she would now need to gather intel on this unexpected alliance. Moving silently through the tunnel, and Sarah navigated to a section she'd prepared months ago, a natural hollow in the rock wall enlarged enough to conceal supplies, extra ammunition, water-dried food, and most importantly, the first of her traps. From a canvas bag, she withdrew packages wrapped in oilcloth sticks of dynamite, stolen one by one from the railway company's storage over the past year. With practiced hands, she began setting charges at key structural points in the tunnel, not to collapse it, but to create controlled rockfalls that would block escape routes when detonated. Next came the tripwires, nearly invisible threads stretched across certain passages, connected to mechanisms that would release a rain of metal ball bearings on the smooth stone floor, or spring-loaded darts tipped with a sedative concoction Clara had unknowingly helped her perfect. Just for wild dogs, Sarah had told her sister when asking about dosages. Humane capture. There was nothing humane about her intentions now. By nightfall, Sarah had transformed the eastern section of the mine into a deadly maze. She then made her way to the chamber where her receiver indicated Clara was being held. Through a crack in the rock wall, she could see her sister tied to a chair but apparently unharmed, her blonde head bowed in what appeared to be sleep. 2 guards remained with her, too many for a direct rescue attempt, especially with the camp alert and the mysterious leader nearby. Sarah retreated to her prepared hollow, consumed a small meal of jerky and hard biscuits, and closed her eyes. She would need rest for what was to come. Tomorrow at midnight, the gang expected a desperate widow to arrive with ransom money. Instead, they would meet the architect of their destruction. Sheriff Cooper paced the length of his office, stopping occasionally to peer through the window at the darkened street. It was nearly 10 hours before the ransom deadline, and there was still no sign of Sarah Blackwood. When the door opened, he whirled, hand instinctively moving to his holster. The tension left his shoulders as Deputy Walker entered. "Any sign of her?" Cooper asked. Walker shook his head. "Checked her cabin and the store, both locked up tight. Horse is gone from the stable." Cooper cursed under his breath. "She's gone after them herself. Damn stubborn woman." "What now, Sheriff? Round up a posse?" Cooper hesitated, his face troubled in the lamplight. No posse. "But, sir, it's Clara Wallace. Everyone in town loves her. We'd have volunteers." "I said no." Cooper's voice cracked like a whip. He softened immediately, placing a hand on his deputy's shoulder. "I mean, it's too dangerous. The Raven Gang is too well-armed, too organized. We'd be leading good men to slaughter. So we do nothing." Walker's young face registered disbelief. Cooper turned away, staring at the wanted posters on the wall. "I've sent for federal marshals. They'll be here by morning." "Morning will be too late. It's the best I can do." Cooper's voice hardened. "Now go home, Walker. That's an order." Alone again, Cooper locked the office door and moved to his desk. From the bottom drawer, he withdrew a bottle of whiskey and a folded map, not of the town, but of the old Blackwood mining complex. "What are you playing at, Eric?" he muttered, tracing a tunnel pathway with his finger. "Why now, after all this time?" His eyes drifted to a daguerreotype on his desk, a younger Cooper standing beside Marshal Blackwood, both in uniform, arms around each other's shoulders, victory smiles fixed for posterity. Before the war, that changed them both. Before Sarah. Before everything went wrong. Cooper threw back a shot of whiskey, grimacing as it burned down his throat. Then he folded the map, checked his revolver, and headed for the door. Sarah Blackwood wasn't the only one with ghosts to confront tonight. Midnight approached with the ominous patience of an executioner. Sarah, concealed in the underbrush 50 yards from the northern tunnel entrance, watched as torches were lit and men positioned themselves among the rocks. A single figure stood outlined against the tunnel mouth, tall, straight-backed, dressed in black from head to foot, his face obscured by shadow, the Raven himself come to welcome her. She had expected to feel something at this moment, rage, fear, even the cold satisfaction of a plan coming to fruition. Instead, there was only a hollow calm, a space where emotion should be. The receiver in her pocket still pulsed, with Clara's location deeper in the mine now moved since morning. A complication, but not an insurmountable one. Sarah studied the men one last time, committing their positions to memory. Then she circled east, beyond their perimeter, to a ventilation shaft half hidden by scrub pine, another entrance not on official maps. As she prepared to descend, hoofbeats sounded in the distance. Sarah pressed herself against the rocky ground, watching as a lone rider approached the camp. Sheriff Cooper, right on schedule. She couldn't hear the exchange between Cooper and the waiting men, but the sheriff was allowed to pass into the tunnel without resistance. Not captured, not searched, welcomed. The betrayal, though suspected, still cut deep. Cooper had been Marshall's friend, had stood white-faced at his funeral, had promised to bring his killers to justice. Sarah waited 10 minutes after Cooper disappeared from view, then lowered herself into the ventilation shaft, her descent controlled by a rope anchored to a sturdy pine. The shaft dropped 30 feet before opening into a narrow maintenance tunnel, one of dozens honeycombing the mountain, most forgotten by all but her. Once on solid ground, Sarah oriented herself. The main tunnel was northwest. Clara's signal came from the deeper chambers to the south. Cooper and the leader had gone north. Her first objective, clear the guards from Clara, relocate her to safety. Second, confront Cooper and discover the extent of his treachery. Third, eliminate the Raven Gang, starting with its leader. The maintenance tunnel was a tight fit, requiring Sarah to crouch as she moved. The air grew thicker, heavier, with dust and the lingering scent of earth. Her lantern turned to its lowest setting, cast just enough light to navigate by. At a junction, she paused, listening. Voices echoed from the larger tunnel beyond, two men complaining about guard duty, their words carrying clearly in the still air. Stuck down here while the boss meets with the sheriff. Better than standing in the cold. Still don't see why we need the girl now that Cooper's delivered the widow. Sarah's blood froze. Cooper had told them she was coming. Had her careful approach been spotted after all? Insurance idiot. Boss doesn't trust Cooper any further than he can throw him. Smart. That snake would sell his own mother. Shh, you hear that? Sarah held her breath, perfectly still in the darkness. Hear what? Thought I heard something from the south tunnel. Probably just rats. This place is crawling with them. I'll check anyway. Boss said to be extra careful tonight. Footsteps approached Sarah's hiding place. There was no retreat, nowhere to conceal herself in the narrow passage. She extinguished her lantern and drew the knife from her boot, quieter than the revolver necessary for what must come next. The guard appeared at the junction lantern, held high, momentarily blind, as he peered into the darkness. Hello, anyone there? Sarah moved like a shadow, one hand clamping over his mouth, the other driving the knife upward beneath his ribs. A sharp twist, a muffled gasp, and the man crumpled. She lowered him silently to the ground, his blood warm and sticky on her hands. The first death, not in defense, not in the heat of battle, but calculated, executed. Sarah felt nothing as she wiped the blade clean on the man's shirt, just the same cold clarity that had guided her for 5 years. Pete, you find anything? The second guard's voice echoed from the main tunnel. Sarah retrieved the fallen lantern and positioned herself at the junction, keeping her face shadowed. Just rats, she called back, her voice pitched low enough to pass for male in the echoing tunnel. Told you, get back here, it's almost time. Sarah rounded the corner, lantern held at waist height to cast her face in darkness. The second guard barely had time to register that she wasn't his companion before the knife found his throat. 2 down, 5 to go, plus Cooper and the leader. With the path to Clara now clear, Sarah moved deeper into the mine, following the signal from the transmitter. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber once used for storing equipment. In the center, tied to a support beam, sat Clara, awake now, her face bruised but her eyes alert. When she saw Sarah emerge from the shadows, her eyes widened in a mixture of relief and horror. Sarah, behind you. The warning came too late. Something hard struck Sarah at the base of her skull, and darkness claimed her. Consciousness returned slowly, bringing with it the dull throb of her head and the taste of copper in her mouth. Sarah kept her eyes closed, assessing. Her hands were bound behind her back, secured to what felt like a wooden chair. The air was damper, cooler. They'd moved her deeper into the mine. Voices filtered through the haze of pain. Should kill her now. She took out Pete and Mick. Boss said no one touches her. She's dangerous. And you'll be dead if you disobey direct orders. Now shut up and watch her until he gets back. Footsteps receded. One guard remained. She could hear him shifting his weight, the impatient tap of his boot against stone. Sarah opened her eyes just enough to see through her lashes. A large chamber support beams, every 10 feet a lantern hanging from each. Mining equipment rusted against the walls. One exit visible, probably more hidden in the shadows. No sign of Clara. The guard stood near the entrance, his back to her, a rifle cradled in his arms. Young from his silhouette, inexperienced from his restless movements. Sarah tested her bonds subtly. Rope, not handcuffs. Tied well, but not by someone who understood that a flexed wrist created slack when relaxed. Already she could feel a fraction of give. "I know you're awake, Mrs. Blackwood." The guard turned, revealing a face younger than she'd expected, barely 20, with the wispy beginnings of a beard. "No point pretending." Sarah met his gaze evenly. "Where's my sister?" "Safe, for now." He stepped closer, studying her with undisguised curiosity. "You don't look like much. Hard to believe you're the one he's been planning for all this time." "Who Cooper?" The young man laughed. "Cooper's just a means to an end. No, the boss has been watching you for years, says you're special." "I'm a shopkeeper." "A shopkeeper who just killed 2 experienced outlaws without breaking a sweat." He gestured to her bloodstained jacket. "You've been preparing too, haven't you? Just like him." Sarah said nothing, working her wrists imperceptibly against the ropes. 2 more minutes, perhaps 3, and her right hand would be free. "Why?" she asked, stalling. "Why Clara? Why now?" The young guard shrugged. "Not my place to question, but between you and me, I think it's personal. Way he talks about you, it's like he knows you." A chill traveled down Sarah's spine. "What's his name?" "Your boss. Folks call him the Raven." "His real name?" The guard hesitated, then seemed to decide there was no harm in telling a prisoner. Eric Black." A gunshot split the air, echoing deafeningly in the chamber. The guard's eyes widened in shock, a crimson stain blossoming on his chest. He crumpled to the ground as the report of the shot continued to reverberate through the tunnels. Sarah wrenched her hand free from the loosened bonds, her gaze fixed on the tunnel entrance, where a figure now stood, a woman's silhouette holding a smoking revolver. "Clara," Sarah whispered, disbelieving. Her sister stepped into the light, her face set in grim determination, so unlike her usual gentle expression. In her free hand, she held a ring of keys. "I got tired of waiting to be rescued," Clara said, crossing to unlock Sarah's remaining bonds. "And it turns out I'm a fair shot myself. All those afternoons you spent at the mines, I followed him once or twice." Sarah stood, rubbing her wrists, a bewildered pride mingling with her shock. "How did you escape?" "They got careless. Thought a nurse would be too frightened to try anything." Clara handed Sarah the guard's rifle. "We need to hurry. That shot will bring the others." "No," Sarah said, taking the weapon. "That shot will spring the first trap." As if on cue, a distant rumble shook the chamber dust and small rocks showering from the ceiling. "What was that?" Clara asked, eyes wide. "Controlled dynamite charge. Western tunnel is now blocked." Sarah checked the rifle's ammunition. "We have approximately 10 minutes before they find an alternate route to us." "Then what's the plan?" Sarah met her sister's eyes, the same soft blue that had looked up to her since childhood, now hardened with a determination that matched her own. "Now," Sarah said, "we hunt." The sisters moved through the tunnels like wraiths, Sarah leading with the certainty of one who had mapped every inch of their surroundings. The distant shouts of confused men echoed from the western passages, punctuated by the occasional curse, as they discovered their primary escape route blocked by fallen rock. "You really did plan for everything," Clara whispered as they ducked into a narrow side tunnel that didn't appear on any official mine plans. Sarah's face remained impassive in the dim light. "Not everything. I didn't plan for you to be conscious, much less armed." "Sorry to ruin your perfect rescue." "Don't be. Your timing was—" Sarah hesitated, then offered the ghost of a smile. "Impeccable." They emerged into a larger chamber with 3 connecting tunnels. Sarah held up a hand, signaling Clara to stop, then knelt to examine the ground. Boot prints in the dust led toward the northern passage, heavy multiple sets. "They're regrouping near the main entrance," she murmured. 5 men, including your guard. That leaves Cooper and their leader unaccounted for." Clara gripped her borrowed revolver tighter. "Sarah, before we go any further, who is this man, the one they call the Raven?" That boy started to say a name. Black something. Sarah stood slowly, brushing dust from her knees. I think I think it might be Eric Blackwood. Blackwood as in Tom, Marshall's brother, yes. Oh, that's impossible, Clara said. You told me he died in the war. That's what Marshall told me. Sarah's voice was flat. Apparently, there were many things my husband didn't tell me. Clara studied her sister's face, searching for emotion beneath the mask of efficiency. If it is Eric, what does he want with you? I intend to ask him that question personally. Sarah checked her revolver, then the rifle slung across her back. After I've eliminated his men and secured our exit. Sarah, these are human beings. Criminals, yes, but to talk about eliminating them so coldly. They took you. Sarah's voice sharpened. They would have killed you once they had me. Whatever humanity they possessed was forfeit the moment they threatened my family. Like the humanity you've locked away these past 5 years. Clara reached for her sister's arm. I understand your pain, but this path you're on, you understand nothing. Sarah pulled away. My pain isn't something to understand, it's something to use. A distant shout interrupted their exchange, followed by a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the tunnels. Clara flinched. What was that tripwire in the Eastern Passage? Sarah said, already moving toward a different tunnel. Rigged to a crossbow mechanism. One more down. You mean one more dead? Clara corrected, hurrying to keep pace. Sarah, this isn't you. The woman you knew died with Marshall and our unborn child. Sarah didn't slow her stride. This is who I've become. They emerged onto a narrow ledge overlooking a large cavern. Below, illuminated by scattered lanterns, 3 men moved cautiously through the space rifles, raised backs to each other in defensive formation. A 4th lay motionless near the eastern entrance, a crossbow bolt protruding from his chest. Sarah surveyed the scene with clinical detachment. Perfect. They've cornered themselves. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small tin case. Inside were 3 small clay balls, a mixture of gunpowder flares and metal shavings she'd prepared in her cabin's shed. Cover your ears and close your eyes, she instructed Clara, striking a match. Sarah, now. Clara complied as Sarah lit the fuse on one of the clay balls and tossed it into the cavern below. The resulting explosion was more flash than force, but the enclosed space amplified its effect. A brilliant white light flooded the chamber, followed by a concussive wave that sent the men stumbling blindly, hands covering their eyes. In the aftermath, Sarah raised the rifle and fired 3 shots in rapid succession. 2 men fell immediately. The third, partially shielded by a rock formation, returned fire wildly, bullets ricocheting off the stone walls. Sarah ducked back, pulling Clara with her. Stay here, don't move until I call for you. Before Clara could protest, Sarah had slipped away, circling behind the ledge to approach the remaining gunmen from another angle. Clara pressed herself against the rock wall, the revolver clutched in her trembling hands, listening to the exchange of gunfire below. A final shot echoed through the cavern, followed by silence. Clara, Sarah's voice called up. It's clear. She peered over the ledge to see her sister standing amid the fallen men, methodically checking each body and collecting their weapons. There was a smear of blood on Sarah's cheek, but otherwise she appeared unharmed. Clara made her way down to the cavern floor, trying not to look at the bodies as she crossed to her sister. Are they all dead? Yes. Sarah handed Clara a cartridge belt. Refill your revolver. We're not done yet. Clara accepted the ammunition with numb fingers. Sarah, this is a massacre. This is survival. Sarah's gaze swept the cavern's exits. Cooper and the Raven Eric will have heard the commotion. They'll be coming for us now or fleeing. Either way, we need to move. To do what? Kill them too. Clara grabbed her sister's arm, forcing Sarah to face her. When does it end? When everyone who hurt you is dead. What then? For the first time since their ordeal began, Sarah's composure cracked. Something raw and wounded flickered in her eyes. I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I never planned for after. Before Clara could respond, the ground beneath them shuddered. A low rumble built from deep within the mountain dust, raining from the ceiling as the vibration intensified. What's happening? Clara clutched at Sarah's arm. Another one of your traps? Sarah's face paled. No, this is... The explosion that ripped through the mine drowned out her words, a wave of force throwing both women to the ground. The air filled with choking dust and the terrible groaning of timber supports giving way. Cave in, Sarah shouted, pulling Clara to her feet. We need to reach the surface. They ran for the northern tunnel, the most direct route to the main entrance. But as they approached, a section of ceiling collapsed, blocking their escape with tons of rock and splintered timber. This way, Sarah veered toward the western passage, half-dragging Clara, who stumbled and coughed in the thickening dust. Behind them, more sections of ceiling gave way, the mine collapsing inward like a house of cards. They made it 20 yards into the western tunnel, for that exit too was sealed by falling debris. Trapped, they pressed against the tunnel wall as the shaking subsided, leaving them in near total darkness amid a cloud of choking dust. The lamp, Sarah gasped, fumbling at her belt where a small miner's lantern hung. Her hands shook as she struggled to light it, finally producing a feeble glow that barely penetrated the dust-filled air. Clara's face, streaked with dirt and blood, emerged from the darkness. What happened? Someone detonated explosives. More than I planted. Much more. Sarah scanned their surroundings, assessing. This was deliberate, designed to bring down the entire northern section. Why would anyone do that? They'd kill their own men. Perhaps that was the point. Sarah's voice hardened. Cooper, it had to be him. He's covering his tracks. Clara leaned against the wall, coughing. What tracks, Sarah? What is going on? Why would the sheriff want us dead? Sarah was silent for a long moment, the lantern's flame casting her face in harsh shadows. Because he knows what I've suspected for years. Marshall's death wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was an execution. What are you saying? I'm saying my husband was murdered because he discovered something about this mine, something worth killing for. Sarah raised the lantern, illuminating the tunnel walls. Look at this stone, Clara. Really look. Clara squinted through the dust. The tunnel walls, which she had assumed were ordinary limestone, had a peculiar quality to the light, a subtle gleam that seemed to run in veins through the gray rock. Is that gold? Not in the played-out silver veins they were mining officially, but in a deeper, undiscovered deposit. Sarah ran her hand along the wall. Marshall found it just before he died. He was going to announce it to the town council, ensure it benefited everyone, not just the Blackwood estate. But someone wanted it for themselves. Clara's eyes widened with understanding. Cooper, Sarah. Cooper, and possibly Eric. Sarah's jaw tightened. If Eric is alive, and if he is the Raven, the timing of his return can't be coincidence. A distant cough echoed through the tunnel, followed by the scrape of boots on stone. Sarah immediately extinguished the lantern, plunging them back into darkness, and drew her revolver. Stay behind me, she whispered, positioning herself between Clara and the sound. Silence stretched, broken only by the settling of disturbed rock and the sisters' controlled breathing. Then a faint light appeared further down the tunnel, a lantern much like their own, its glow strengthening as the bearer approached. Sarah, Clara. A man's voice rough with dust but unmistakable. Cooper, Sarah hissed, raising her revolver. The sheriff emerged from the darkness, his uniform coated in rock dust, a bloody gash across his forehead. His own revolver hung at his side, not drawn. Thank God, he said, raising the lantern higher. I thought you were both dead. Sarah's gun remained steady. Not for lack of trying on your part. Cooper's eyes narrowed, then widened as he registered the revolver aimed at his chest. Sarah, what are you doing? I'm here to help. Like you helped my husband, Sarah's voice was deadly calm. Or like you helped the Raven kidnap my sister. Sarah, don't lie to me, James, not now. The revolver didn't waver. His men said you delivered me to them, said you'd been working with the Raven. That explosion was your doing, wasn't it? Trying to bury the evidence, bury us. Cooper slowly raised his hands, the lantern casting grotesque shadows on the tunnel walls. I can explain everything, but not like this. Please lower the gun. Give me one reason I shouldn't kill you right now. Because I know where Marshall is. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. The revolver dipped slightly. Marshall is dead. I buried him. You buried an empty coffin. Cooper said, his eyes never leaving hers. Marshall Blackwood is alive. So, time seemed to stop in the dust-filled tunnel. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, her mind refusing to process Cooper's words. You're lying, she finally managed, but the conviction had drained from her voice. I wish I were. Cooper lowered the lantern slightly. It's a long story, Sarah, and we don't have much time. That explosion wasn't mine, it was Eric's. He's collapsing the tunnels to trap us all down here. Why would he do that? Clara asked, stepping forward despite Sarah's protective arm. Because his plan failed. Cooper's gaze shifted between the sisters. He wanted Sarah not dead but broken. When you started killing his men, he decided to end it another way. Sarah's arm had begun to tremble, the revolver growing heavy. If Marshall is alive, where has he been for 5 years? Why would he let me believe? A rumble interrupted her, more rock dust showering from the ceiling. Cooper glanced nervously upward. We need to move. This section isn't stable. He gestured down the tunnel. There's an old ventilation shaft about 50 yards ahead. It might be our only way out now. I'm not going anywhere with you until you explain, Sarah insisted, though she lowered the revolver slightly. Cooper sighed, fatigue evident in every line of his body. 5 years ago, Marshall discovered something in these mines, not just gold, but documents. Evidence that his family's mining company had been laundering money for years, financing gun runners during the war. His father, his uncles, all involved. That's impossible, Sarah said. The Blackwoods were respected. Respected doesn't mean honest. Cooper stepped closer, his voice dropping. Marshall found ledgers hidden in a strong room near the main office, names, dates, amounts enough to send half the county's elite to prison. He came to me, wanted to make it right. So what happened? Eric happened, Marshall's younger brother presumed dead at Vicksburg, but actually running with deserters turned outlaws. He'd been using the old family connections to build his own operation, the Raven Gang. Sarah's mind raced pieces, falling into place. The gold shipment robbery was never about the gold. Cooper nodded grimly. It was about silencing Marshall, retrieving those ledgers before he could expose everything. But why fake his death? Clara asked. Why not just kill him? Cooper's eyes dropped. Because of you, Sarah. Because despite everything, Eric couldn't bring himself to murder his brother's wife. And Marshall agreed to disappear to let you think he was dead, to protect you from what was coming. Protect me. Sarah's voice cracked, rage replacing shock. I lost everything, our baby. He didn't know you were pregnant. Cooper's face creased with genuine regret. By the time word reached him, it was too late. He was already deep undercover, infiltrating Eric's operation from within. Another tremor shook the tunnel, stronger this time. A sizable rock broke loose from the ceiling, narrowly missing Clara. We need to move, Cooper urged again. I'll tell you everything else on the way. Sarah hesitated, her world tilting on its axis. If Cooper was telling the truth, if Marshall was alive. Lead the way, she finally said, holstering her revolver. But I'm watching every move you make. They moved deeper into the tunnel, Cooper in front, with the lantern, Sarah behind him, with her hand never far from her weapon, Clara bringing up the rear. As they walked, Cooper continued his explanation. For 3 years, Marshall worked his way up in the Raven Gang, gaining Eric's trust, gathering information. His plan was to dismantle the operation from within, then collect evidence on the powerful people behind it. In the last 2 years, Sarah asked, her voice tight. Cooper's pace slowed. Things got complicated. Eric suspected someone in his organization was informing on him. He became paranoid, unpredictable. Marshall had to be more careful. That doesn't explain why he never contacted me. He tried once. Cooper glanced back at her. About a year ago, he came to town in disguise, watched you at the store. But when he saw how you'd moved on, he couldn't bring himself to upend your life again. Moved on, Sarah stopped in her tracks. I've been a ghost for 5 years. I've done nothing but exist and plan. Plan what? Sarah, Cooper turned to face her fully. Revenge, is that what all your trips to the mine were about? The shooting practice, the trap. The accusation caught her off guard. How did you know about that? It's my job to know what happens in my town. His expression softened. I've been watching you too, Sarah. We all have. Worried about you. You've been spying on me. Sarah's hand moved to her revolver again. For Eric. No, Cooper's denial was immediate. For Marshall, to keep you safe while he finished what he started. Before Sarah could respond, they reached a junction in the tunnel. To the left, the passage continued deeper into the mountain. To the right, a narrow opening revealed the bottom of a vertical shaft, dim light visible far above. There, Cooper pointed. That shaft leads to the surface. It'll be a hard climb, but a gunshot echoed through the tunnel, the bullet striking the rock wall inches from Cooper's head. All three dropped instinctively Cooper's lantern, smashing on the ground, plunging them into darkness, save for the faint light from above. "Get to the shaft," Cooper shouted, drawing his revolver and firing blindly toward the source of the attack. Sarah grabbed Clara's hand, pulling her toward the vertical passage. "Go start climbing." "What about you?" Clara resisted. "I'll be right behind you." "Go." As Clara began scaling the rough-hewn ladder built into the shaft wall, Sarah drew her own weapon and crouched beside Cooper. In the near darkness, she could just make out a figure approaching from the left tunnel, a tall silhouette moving with confident purpose despite the sporadic gunfire. "Eric," Cooper breathed, his voice barely audible over the gunshots. "Cover me," Sarah replied, then darted toward the oncoming figure, using the darkness and her knowledge of the tunnels to her advantage. Cooper continued firing, forcing their attacker to seek cover, while Sarah circled through a side passage she knew connected further ahead. The gambit worked. She emerged from the darkness behind the gunman, her revolver pressed to the back of his head before he realized she was there. "Drop the gun," she ordered, her voice steel. The man froze, then slowly lowered his weapon to the ground. "Hello, Sarah." That voice, deep resonant with the slight Carolina drawl she'd fallen in love with a lifetime ago. The revolver in her hand trembled. "Turn around." Slowly. He complied, hands raised, face emerging from shadow as he turned to meet her gaze for the first time in 5 years. Marshall Blackwood looked older, harder, a scar running from temple to jaw that hadn't been there before, his once clean-shaven face now sporting a thick beard streaked with gray. But his eyes, those same piercing blue eyes that had once looked at her with such love, were unmistakable. "It can't be," Sarah whispered, the revolver dipping. "It's me, Sarah." His voice was rough with emotion. "I'm so sorry." The reunion Sarah had ceased to even dream about was happening in the worst possible way, in a collapsing mind with years of grief and rage between them, and so many unanswered questions hanging in the dust-filled air. "You left me." The accusation tore from her throat. "You let me believe you were dead. Our baby. I didn't know." Marshall's face contorted with genuine anguish. "Sarah, I swear if I'd known you were pregnant, you'd have what? Come home, abandon your crusade." The bitter laugh that escaped her was unrecognizable even to herself. "You chose your brother over me. I chose to protect you." Marshall took a step towards her, stopping when she raised the revolver again. "Eric would have killed you if I hadn't agreed to his terms. His terms to fake your death, to abandon your wife." Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't shoot you right now." "Because he's not the one who betrayed you." The new voice came from behind Sarah. She whirled to find Cooper standing there, his own revolver now pointed squarely at her. "James," Marshall's face registered confusion, then dawning horror. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done 5 years ago." Cooper's expression hardened. "Cutting loose ends." Understanding crashed over Sarah like a wave. "It was you. You're the one working with Eric." Cooper's smile was cold. "Not with him. Against him. Eric was always too soft when it came to family. Too sentimental." "The explosion," Marshall began, "was meant to bury both Blackwood brothers along with their secrets." Cooper gestured with his revolver. "And now I'll finish what the cave-in couldn't." "James, think about what you're doing," Marshall urged, edging closer to Sarah. "Whatever Eric paid you, this was never about money." Cooper's laugh held no humor. "This was about her. It's always been about her." Sarah's blood ran cold as Cooper's gaze fixed on her with an intensity that bordered on madness. "You chose him," Cooper said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I stood by you for 5 years, watched over you, protected you, loved you from afar, and still you chose the memory of a dead man over a living one." "James," Sarah said carefully, recognizing the dangerous edge in his voice. "You've been my friend." "Friend," the word twisted in his mouth. "I wanted to be your savior, Sarah. When Marshall agreed to disappear, I thought, given time, you would turn to me. But instead you turned to vengeance." A tremor stronger than the previous ones shook the tunnel, large chunks of rock breaking loose from the ceiling. One struck Cooper's shoulder, causing him to stumble, and his shot to go wide, the bullet ricocheting harmlessly off the wall. Marshall seized the moment, tackling Cooper to the ground. The men grappled for control of the revolver, rolling dangerously close to the edge of a fissure that had opened in the tunnel floor. Sarah raised her weapon trying to get a clear shot at Cooper, but the struggling men were too entangled, the risk of hitting Marshall too great. Nearby, Clara had paused her climb to watch the scene unfold in horror. "Sarah," she called down, "the whole place is coming down. We have to go now." As if to emphasize her point, a massive section of ceiling collapsed 30 yards down the tunnel, the wave of destruction moving rapidly toward them. Marshall and Cooper remained locked in their death struggle, oblivious to the approaching doom. The revolver between them discharged once, twice, neither man flinching, both driven by something beyond pain or fear. "Marshall!" Sarah screamed over the growing rumble. "Let him go. We have to leave." Her husband looked up for just a moment, his eyes meeting hers across the chaos. In that instant, Cooper wrenched an arm free and struck Marshall across the face with the butt of his revolver. Marshall fell backward, momentarily stunned. Cooper scrambled to his feet, raising the weapon for a killing shot, only to be met by 2 bullets from Sarah's revolver. He staggered, a look of disbelief crossing his features, then toppled sideways into the fissure, vanishing into the darkness below. "Marshall!" Sarah rushed forward, grabbing her husband's arm and hauling him to his feet as the tunnel continued to disintegrate around them. Moved together, they staggered toward the shaft where Clara waited. The collapse was mere seconds behind them, the very ground beneath their feet beginning to give way. "You first," Marshall insisted, pushing Sarah toward the ladder. "No," she gripped his jacket with desperate strength. "I lost you once, never again." Something shifted in Marshall's expression, a softening, a recognition. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded and began climbing the shaft ladder, Sarah right behind him. They were halfway up when the final collapse came, a thunderous roar as the tunnel below disappeared entirely, a cloud of dust billowing up the shaft, enveloping them in choking darkness. Sarah's hand found Marshall's boot on the ladder rung above her, Clara's voice calling encouragement from somewhere higher up. One rung at a time, they ascended through the suffocating cloud toward the promise of light and air above, toward a future that minutes ago Sarah hadn't believed possible. The sun was setting by the time they emerged from the shaft, coughing and blinking in the sudden brightness. Clara had reached the surface first and now helped pull Sarah and Marshall up the final few feet onto solid ground. For several minutes, they simply lay there, gulping clean air, covered in dust and blood, but alive. Around them, the mountain continued to settle, occasional rumbles indicating further collapses deep within its heart. Sarah sat up first, her gaze fixed on Marshall, who lay beside her, solid, real breathing. Part of her still couldn't believe it wasn't some dust-induced hallucination. "Your head," she said, noticing the blood trickling from where Cooper had struck him. Marshall touched the wound gingerly. "I've had worse." An awkward silence fell between them, 5 years of separation, creating a chasm wider than any mine shaft. Clara, sensing their need for privacy, stood and brushed dust from her clothes. "I'll check the perimeter, make sure we're alone." As she walked away, Marshall slowly sat up, wincing with the effort. "You look good, Sarah." A startled laugh escaped her. "I look like I've been dragged through hell." "Still beautiful to me." His gaze was steady, searching her face for something, forgiveness perhaps, or the woman he'd left behind. "Don't," Sarah's voice hardened. "Don't pretend this is some happy reunion. You let me believe you were dead, Marshall. For 5 years I grieved you. I lost our child." Pain etched itself deeper into the lines of his face. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life making that up to you if you'll let me." "Making it up to me?" Sarah's voice rose. "How exactly do you plan to do that?" "Give me back those 5 years. Give me back our baby." Marshall flinched as if she'd struck him. "Sarah, please." "No." She stood, sudden fury propelling her to her feet. "You don't get to ask anything of me. Not yet. First you tell me everything, starting with your brother." Marshall sighed, running a hand through his dust-coated hair. "Eric didn't die at Vicksburg. He was captured but escaped during a prisoner transfer. By the time I heard he was alive, he'd already fallen in with deserters turned outlaws. And rather than tell your wife you kept it secret, I was trying to bring him home," Marshall said, his voice low. "He was lost, Sarah. The war changed him, changed both of us. I thought I could save him. While he was robbing and killing innocent people," Sarah paced, unable to contain the emotions now pouring through the cracks in her carefully constructed walls. "Does family loyalty justify that?" "No." Marshall's answer was immediate, firm. "Nothing justifies what he became." But I understood it, how war can hollow a man out, make him capable of things he never thought possible. His gaze found hers. The same way grief hollowed you out made you capable of setting traps and killing men with cold precision. The observation struck too close to home. Sarah turned away, staring at the mountain that had nearly become their tomb. When I discovered the ledgers, Marshall continued, and after a moment, I realized the corruption went beyond Eric. Cooper was just the tip of the iceberg, judges, bankers, even the territorial governor, all profiting from gun running and worse. So you faked your death. Eric gave me an ultimatum: disappear and keep you safe, or watch you die before he killed me too. Marshall's voice turned bitter. I thought I was protecting you. Instead, I destroyed you in a different way. Sarah closed her eyes, absorbing the painful truth. In the distance, she could see Clara standing atop a rocky outcropping, watching the wilderness spread below for any sign of threat. Why didn't you ever try to contact me? She finally asked. In 5 years, nothing. Marshall stood, moving cautiously toward her, like she was a wounded animal that might bolt. I did, once, last year. Cooper mentioned that. Sarah kept her back to him. Said you saw I'd moved on and couldn't bear to disrupt my life again. That wasn't what stopped me. Marshall was closer now. She could feel his presence just behind her. I saw what you'd become, how hard, how focused. I watched you practicing with that revolver in the old mine shaft, setting traps. I realized you weren't grieving anymore. You were hunting. Sarah turned to face him, startled by his proximity. Hunting what? Justice or vengeance, maybe both. His eyes held hers. Cooper told me that you were rebuilding your life. Instead, I found a widow transformed into a warrior. And that scared you away. Bitterness crept into her voice. No. Marshall shook his head. It made me realize I'd underestimated you. That maybe you didn't need saving after all. The admission hung between them, unexpected and strangely validating. For the first time since his reappearance, Sarah felt something other than anger or shock, a flicker of connection to the man she'd once loved beyond reason. What about Eric? She asked, steering back to safer ground. Where is he now? If he wasn't caught in the collapse, he's long gone. Marshall gestured toward the horizon. He always has an escape plan and men waiting at predetermined locations. We can't let him get away. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her revolver. Not after everything he's done. Sarah, Marshall's voice gentled. The man I've been tracking, the leader of the Raven gang, that's not really Eric anymore. My brother died at Vicksburg in every way that matters. What's left is just a shell filled with bitterness and regret. You're defending him still. No. Marshall's hand reached for hers, hesitant. I'm saying that chasing him now won't bring back what we lost. Sarah looked down at his outstretched hand, calloused, scarred, so familiar yet strange. After a long moment, she allowed her fingers to brush against his, the first contact between them in 5 years. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That depends. Marshall's fingers curled gently around hers. On whether there's anything left between us worth rebuilding. The question hung in the air, unanswerable in the wake of so much revelation and shock. Before Sarah could respond, Clara's voice called out from the ridge. Riders coming? At least 6 of them. Marshall released Sarah's hand, immediately alert. Eric's reinforcements. We need to move. Sarah shook her head, a grim smile forming. Not yet. There's one more thing Cooper didn't know about. She led them quickly through the pine trees to a small clearing where 3 horses stood, tethered her own mare, plus 2 others she'd hidden the previous day. You really did plan for everything, Marshall said, admiration evident in his voice. Not everything. Sarah untied the horses. I planned to leave with only 1 passenger. Clara joined them, breathless from running. They're moving fast. 5 minutes, maybe less. Then we ride faster. Sarah mounted her mare with practiced ease, the others following suit. There's a canyon to the south. We can lose them in the rock formations before nightfall. As they spurred the horses into motion, Sarah cast one final glance at the mountain that had nearly claimed them, the place where her husband had died, and somehow returned where Cooper's betrayal had been revealed, where the life she'd carefully reconstructed over 5 painful years had shattered in a matter of hours. Whatever lay ahead, reconciliation or final separation, justice, or mercy for Eric, a new beginning, or the closing of old wounds, one thing was certain: Sarah Blackwood was no longer simply surviving. For the first time in 5 years, despite the danger at their heels, she was alive. Night had fallen by the time they reached the canyon, a maze of weathered sandstone formations cutting through the landscape like the spine of some ancient beast. Sarah led them confidently through passages too narrow for more than one rider at a time, the horses' hooves echoing off the stone walls. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit had faded. Either Eric's men had lost their trail, or more likely were waiting for daylight to continue the hunt. "We should rest while we can," Marshall suggested, as they emerged into a small box canyon hidden from all sides. "The horses need it even if we don't." Sarah nodded, dismounting stiffly. The adrenaline that had carried her through the day was waning, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and the dull throb of injuries she'd hardly registered in the heat of escape, bruised ribs from the cave-in, a gash along her forearm from flying debris. Clara immediately shifted into nurse mode, insisting on examining both Sarah and Marshall by the light of a small fire they dared to build in this sheltered spot. "You've got a concussion," she told Marshall as she cleaned the wound at his temple, "and these ribs might be cracked." "Had worse," he repeated his earlier assessment, wincing as she applied pressure to his side. "So you keep saying." Clara's tone was brisk but gentle. "Sarah's arm needs stitches, but I lost my medical bag in the tunnels." "Use this." Marshall reached into his saddlebag, producing a compact medical kit. At Sarah's questioning look, he explained, "Standard issue for undercover work. Never know when you'll need to patch yourself up away from help." While Clara improvised sutures for Sarah's arm, Marshall refreshed their canteens from a small spring bubbling from the canyon wall. The domestic scene was eerily normal against the backdrop of their circumstances. Three people bound by blood and marriage finally reunited after years of separation, yet strangers to each other in fundamental ways. "There," Clara said, tying off the last stitch on Sarah's arm. "It'll scar, but it should heal clean. One more won't matter." Sarah murmured, her gaze drifting to the faded line across her palm, a reminder of her first months of survival training when she'd been clumsy with the hunting knife. Clara hesitated, then stepped away to tend the horses, offering the siblings privacy once more. Marshall settled beside Sarah at the small fire, offering her a strip of jerky from his provisions. For several minutes they ate in silence, the crackle of burning wood and distant cries of nighthawks the only sounds. "Clara turned out to be quite the survivor," Marshall finally observed. "Last time I saw her, she was just a girl." "War changes people," Sarah replied, echoing his earlier sentiment. "She saw things as a nurse that would break most men." "And you—" Marshall's voice softened. "What broke you, Sarah?" She stared into the flames, considering the question. "Nothing broke me. I refused to break. That was the problem." Marshall nodded slowly, understanding. "Sometimes breaking is how we heal, letting the wound open so it can clean itself." "Is that what you did in those 5 years?" "No." His honesty was disarming. "I did what you did. I built walls, focused on the mission, became someone else." Sarah studied his profile in the firelight, the new lines around his eyes, the scar running down his face, the silver threading through his beard. He was both achingly familiar and a complete stranger. "Who did you become?" she asked quietly. Marshall's gaze remained fixed on the fire. "Someone harder, colder. Someone who could ride with killers and not flinch. Someone who could watch his own brother descend into darkness and document it dispassionately. Like me watching the town move on without Marshall Blackwood. Recording everyone's betrayal." Sarah's laugh held no humor. "We make quite the pair." "We always did." Marshall finally looked at her, something vulnerable breaking through his carefully maintained facade. "Sarah, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I need to know, is there anything left of us, of what we were?" The question struck at the heart of everything Sarah had refused to examine in the chaos of the day. The husband she'd grieved and sanctified in memory was now flesh and blood beside her. Not a perfect hero, but a flawed man who had made impossible choices. "I don't know," she answered truthfully. "The woman who loved you died 5 years ago. I'm someone else now." "I understand." Marshall nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "For what it's worth, I think I would have loved this version of you too." The simple statement pierced Sarah's defenses in a way nothing else had. Before she could respond, Clara returned from tending the horses, her expression troubled. "One of the mounts is favoring its left foreleg," she reported. "We've pushed them hard. They'll need more rest before we can move on." We don't have that luxury, Marshall said, rising. Eric's men will be combing these canyons by dawn. Where are we even going? Clara asked, settling beside her sister. We can't go back to Redemption Creek, not with Cooper's men potentially still loyal to him. Silver Springs, Marshall suggested. It's a 2-day ride. I have contacts there, federal marshals who've been building a case against the corruption ring. They can protect you both While you what? Sarah interrupted. Go after Eric alone again. Marshall met her challenging gaze. It's my responsibility to finish this. It's our responsibility, Sarah corrected. He took 5 years from both of us and nearly killed my sister. I won't risk losing you again. That's not your decision to make. Sarah stood facing him squarely. Not anymore. They stared at each other, two immovable forces locked in silent battle. Clara watched the confrontation with growing concern until a sound from beyond the canyon walls broke the tension, the distant echo of men's voices carried on the night air. They're closer than we thought, Marshall said, immediately alert. Sarah was already moving, gathering their minimal supplies. We need to split up. Multiple trails confuse the pursuit. No, both Marshall and Clara responded simultaneously. We stay together, Marshall insisted. We're outnumbered and outgunned. Our only advantage is each other. He's right, Clara added. Division is exactly what Eric would want. Sarah hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Fine, but we don't head for Silver Springs. That's the first place they'll look for official help. Where then? Marshall asked. A slow smile spread across Sarah's face, the first genuine one he'd seen. I have another hideout, one not even Cooper knew about. Joe? The hideout turned out to be an abandoned trapper's cabin nestled in a wooded valley 20 miles east, far from the usual trails and nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Sarah had discovered it 2 years ago while hunting and had gradually stocked it with provisions and supplies, creating a fallback position she'd never expected to actually use. By mid-morning of the next day, they had reached its weathered porch, the horses exhausted but intact, no sign of pursuit for the past several hours. You really do think of everything, Marshall said, as Sarah unlocked the heavy padlock on the cabin door. Not everything, she replied, pushing the door open. Just worst-case scenarios. The interior was sparse but functional, a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table and chairs, shelves stocked with preserved food and medical supplies, a narrow bed in one corner, and assorted tools and weapons organized with military precision. It's not much, Sarah acknowledged as they entered, but it's secure. No one comes this way, especially not this time of year. Clara immediately began unpacking their saddlebags, organizing their meager possessions with the efficiency of a field nurse. Marshall examined this cabin's defenses, the sturdy shutters on the windows, the clear sight lines to all approaches, the carefully cached weapons. This would have taken years to prepare, he said, turning to Sarah with newfound respect. I had time. Her response was simple, devoid of accusation. As Clara prepared a meal from the cabin's stores, Marshall spread a map on the table, one he'd carried close to his body throughout their ordeal. This is everything I've gathered on Eric's operation, he explained, pointing to markings across 3 territories. Safe houses contacts supply routes. Sarah studied the map with a strategist's eye. This is an extensive network. He's been busy. The gang is just the visible part, Marshall continued. The real power is behind them, wealthy men using the Raven as their enforcer, their protector of secrets. Men like your father, Sarah asked quietly. Marshall's jaw tightened. My father laid the groundwork, yes, but he's been dead for 10 years. The current players are more dangerous, politicians, judges, bankers spanning 3 territories. And the documents you found, the ones that started all this? Here. Marshall tapped a location on the map, a small X marked in the mountains 20 miles north of their current position. Hidden in a cave only Eric and I know about. The original ledgers plus everything I've gathered since. Why haven't you taken them to the authorities? Clara asked, setting plates of food before them. Because I don't know who I can trust. Marshall accepted the plate with a nod of thanks. Cooper wasn't the only lawman on their payroll. The last marshal I approached was dead within a week. Sarah considered this, her tactical mind already formulating a plan. So we need to secure those documents and find someone incorruptible to deliver them to. Exactly. Someone with enough power and independence to act on them. The territorial governor, Clara suggested. Marshall shook his head. Too compromised. My best contact is Judge Harmon in Denver. He's been building a federal case against corruption in the territories for years. These documents would give him everything he needs. Denver is a week's ride from here, Sarah noted, and Eric's men are still searching for us. Which is why I should go alone, Marshall insisted. You and Clara stay here safe while I retrieve the documents and make contact with Harmon. Sarah's expression hardened. We've had this discussion. I'm not being sidelined. This isn't about protecting you anymore, Marshall argued. It's about mission efficiency. One rider moves faster, draws less attention. He's right, Sarah, Clara interjected gently. And you're injured. Sarah looked between them, frustration evident in her features. Before she could respond, a sound from outside froze them all. The distinctive snap of a twig breaking under boot heel. Marshall immediately extinguished the lamp. In the sudden darkness, they moved with practiced precision. Sarah to the window, Marshall to the door, Clara retrieving the rifle from its mounting on the wall. Two riders, Sarah whispered, peering through a crack in the shutters. Coming up from the south. Marshall drew his revolver. Eric's men. Can't tell. They're keeping to the tree line. For several tense minutes, they waited in silence, weapons ready. The riders approached slowly, making no attempt to conceal their arrival, now a sign they might not be hostile, but caution had kept all three of them alive this long. Hello, the cabin? A voice finally called. Marshall, you in there? Marshall's stance relaxed slightly, recognition dawning. That's Thomas, one of my contacts in Eric's gang. He's been feeding me information for the past year. Can you trust him? Sarah's revolver remained steady. As much as anyone. Marshall moved toward the door. Cover me. He opened the door a crack, calling back, identify yourself. It's Thomas and Ellie. We've been looking for you since the cave-in. The boss thinks you're dead. Marshall glanced at Sarah, who nodded her readiness, then opened the door wider. Two riders sat on horseback in the clearing. A lanky man with a shock of red hair and a young woman barely out of her teens, both looking exhausted and trail-worn. Who's with you? Thomas asked, eyes narrowing at the sight of weapons trained on him. Friends, Marshall answered simply. Why are you here, Thomas? Because everything's gone to hell since the mine collapsed. Thomas dismounted carefully, hands visible. Eric's convinced someone betrayed him, went on a rampage, killed two of his own men who questioned him. Then he started raving about documents, saying he had to get to them before you did. Sarah and Marshall exchanged alarmed glances. He knows where they are? Marshall asked. Don't know for sure, Thomas replied, but he gathered his most trusted men and headed north about 4 hours ago, riding hard. The cash, Sarah breathed. He's going for the documents. Marshall's face hardened with resolve. We have to beat him there. It's a trap, Clara warned. He could be expecting you to come after them. Doesn't matter. Marshall was already gathering supplies. If Eric gets those documents, everything I've worked for, everything I've sacrificed will be for nothing. There's more, the young woman Ellie spoke for the first time, her voice surprisingly steady for someone so young. Federal marshals raided Cooper's office last night, found papers linking him to the gun-running operation. They're rounding up everyone connected. How did they know? Sarah asked. Anonymous tip, according to gossip in town. Thomas shrugged. Someone sent a package of evidence to the federal office in Denver 2 days ago. Marshall turned to Sarah, surprise evident in his expression. Did you? No. Sarah looked equally confused. I've been a bit busy trying not to die in a mine collapse. Then who? A moment of realization passed between them simultaneously. Eric, they said in unison. He's cutting his losses, Marshall continued, understanding dawning, sacrificing the smaller players to save himself and the biggest backers. Which means he needs those original documents more than ever, Sarah added. They're the only evidence that would implicate him directly. The urgency of their situation crystallized in that moment. The documents weren't just evidence anymore. They were leverage in a rapidly escalating war between Eric and his former allies. We leave immediately, Sarah decided, already moving to prepare. All of us. Thomas, you and Ellie know Eric's movements. You'll guide us. Clara, gather all the medical supplies. We're likely to need them. Marshall watched her take command with a mixture of admiration and concern. Sarah, your arm. We'll hold. She met his gaze steadily. This ends today, Marshall, one way or another. Something passed between them then. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. A recognition of the warriors they had both become in their years apart. One way or another, he agreed, checking his revolver. The impromptu company departed within 20 minutes, riding north into the gathering storm clouds, 5 people against what remained of the Raven Gang, racing toward a confrontation 5 years in the making. The cave containing Marshall's hidden documents was nestled in a steep hillside accessible only by a narrow trail that wound between jagged rock formations. By the time Sarah's group reached the base of the hill, rain had begun to fall, a steady drizzle that reduced visibility and turned the path into treacherous mud. No sign of Eric's men, Thomas reported after scouting ahead, but there are fresh tracks leading up, maybe 3 hours old. We're too late, Marshall said grimly. Sarah studied the hillside through her brass telescope. Maybe not. Look there, 2 horses tethered at the halfway point. If Eric's already found the documents, why leave guards posted? Because he's still searching, Marshall realized. The cave system is extensive. I designed the hiding place to be difficult to find, even if you knew the general location. How many men would he have brought? Clara asked. 5, maybe 6, Thomas answered. His most trusted lieutenants. Sarah formulated a plan quickly. Thomas, you and Ellie create a diversion at the western approach. Make them think a larger force is coming. Clara, you stay here with the horses. Be ready for a quick departure. Marshall and I will go in through the eastern passage, the one you showed me on the map. Marshall looked at her with surprise. You memorized the cave layout from a single glance at the map, Sarah smiled thinly. I've always had a good memory for escape routes. They separated as planned. Thomas and Ellie circling west while Sarah and Marshall began the treacherous climb up the eastern face of the hill. The rain made handholds slippery, and more than once Sarah felt her injured arm threaten to give way. But determination drove her forward, Marshall just ahead, occasionally reaching back to offer support. They had nearly reached the eastern entrance when gunfire erupted from the western slope, Thomas and Ellie's diversion underway. Shouts echoed across the hillside as Eric's men responded to the perceived threat. Now, Marshall urged, pulling Sarah into the narrow opening of the cave. Inside, the air was cool and damp, the passage barely wide enough for them to move single file. Marshall led by memory, Sarah close behind, both moving silently despite the urgency of their mission. The sound of gunfire continued outside, more distant now, as they penetrated deeper into the hillside. After several minutes of careful navigation, Marshall held up a hand, stopping. Ahead, a faint light flickered, a lantern carried by someone deeper in the cave system. Eric, he whispered, drawing his revolver. Sarah drew her own weapon, nodding her readiness. They advanced slowly, using the natural rock formations for cover until they reached a larger chamber. The scene that greeted them confirmed their worst fears. Eric Blackwood stood in the center of the space, illuminated by a lantern set on a stone ledge. He was taller than Sarah remembered from the few times she'd met him before Marshall's death, lean and hard with the same blue eyes as his brother, but none of the warmth. Before him lay an open metal box, its contents leather-bound ledgers and bundles of papers spread across a natural stone shelf. He was alone, which meant his men were either all engaged with Thomas's diversion or stationed elsewhere in the cave system. Marshall stepped into the chamber first, revolver raised. Hello, brother? Eric looked up, unsurprised. Marshall, I was wondering when you'd join me. His gaze shifted to Sarah as she emerged from the shadows. And Sarah, how lovely to see you again after all these years. Step away from the documents, Eric, Marshall ordered. Or what? You'll shoot me? Eric smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. We both know you won't do that, Marshall. You've had 5 years of opportunities. Things change. Do they? Eric gestured to the papers before him. I've been reading your notes. Meticulous as always. You documented every move I made, every crime I committed, yet you never pulled the trigger. Why is that, I wonder? Because he still believed he could save you. Sarah answered, her revolver steady. I have no such illusions. Eric's attention shifted fully to her, something like admiration in his gaze. You've changed, Sarah, harder now, more interesting, and more willing to put a bullet in you, she replied coldly. I believe that. Eric nodded thoughtfully. But before you do, don't you want to know why? Why all of this happened? Why your husband let you believe he was dead for 5 years? I know why, Sarah said. To protect me from you. Eric laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the cave walls. Is that what he told you, that it was all for your protection? He looked at Marshall with mock sympathy. You always were a better liar than me, brother. Don't listen to him, Sarah, Marshall warned, his voice tight. He's trying to divide us. No, I'm trying to give her the truth, something you've never done. Eric's expression hardened. Marshall didn't stay away to protect you, Sarah. He stayed away because he believed you betrayed him. With me. The accusation hung in the air, absurd and venomous. Sarah almost laughed until she saw the flash of discomfort on Marshall's face. That's ridiculous, she said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. Marshall, it's complicated, Marshall replied, not meeting her eyes. Cooper showed me letters, Sarah. Letters that appeared to be between you and Eric before my death. Romantic letters. On letters. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. You believed I was having an affair based on letters you never actually saw me write. I didn't want to believe it, Marshall defended. But the handwriting, and there were details only you would know. Cooper forged them, Eric interjected, his voice surprisingly gentle. He was obsessed with you, Sarah. Always had been, even when Marshall and I were both competing for your attention before you chose my brother. Sarah's mind reeled. Competing? I barely knew you. We met 6 times before you married Marshall, Eric said. You probably don't remember I was the quiet one, always in my brother's shadow. But I remembered you. I remembered everything about you. A cold realization dawned on Sarah. You're in love with me. That's what this has all been about. Eric's smile was sad. Not all of it, but enough. Cooper knew my weakness, used it against me. Against us all. Cooper, Marshall said the name like a curse. He played us against each other from the beginning. And you believed him, Sarah said, her voice hollow. After everything we shared, you believed I could betray you like that. Marshall finally met her gaze, regret evident in his features. The war changed me, Sarah. Made me doubt everything, even us. By the time I realized the letters were forgeries, you had already buried me and moved on, or so I thought. The revelation settled over them like the dust in the cave, another layer of betrayal and misunderstanding in a story already thick with both. How very touching, Eric said after a moment. But while this family reunion has been illuminating, I'm afraid I have pressing business elsewhere. He began gathering the documents. You see, these papers implicate not just Cooper and his ilk, but men much more powerful. Men who would pay handsomely to ensure they remain private. You're planning to blackmail them, Marshall realized. I prefer to think of it as negotiated silence. Eric smiled coldly. The Raven Gang as you knew it is finished. It's time for me to evolve. We can't let you take those documents, Sarah said, her revolver still trained on him. You mean the documents that prove your husband didn't trust you, that detail how he spent 5 years hunting his own brother instead of returning to his grieving wife? Eric raised an eyebrow. Are you sure you want those made public, Sarah? Before either could respond, gunfire erupted again, closer this time inside the cave system. The diversion had failed. Eric's men were returning. It appears my associates have dealt with your friends, Eric observed calmly. Now I suggest you both lower your weapons, or this reunion will end far more tragically than it began. Marshall and Sarah exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. The connection of two people who, despite everything, still knew each other's thoughts. I'm sorry, Eric, Marshall said, lowering his revolver slightly. But this ends here. In a fluid motion, he dove to the side as Sarah fired not at Eric, but at the lantern on the ledge. The chamber plunged into darkness as the glass shattered, oil igniting briefly before extinguishing. Chaos erupted. Eric cursed. There was the sound of paper scattering, and then the distinctive click of a hammer being cocked. Marshall, Sarah called out, unable to see in the sudden blackness. A gunshot flashed in the darkness, illuminating the scene for a split second. Eric standing with his revolver extended, Marshall on the ground, Sarah moving toward them both. Then darkness again, punctuated by the sound of struggle, bodies colliding, grunts of exertion, the scrape of boot on stone. Sarah felt her way forward cautiously, unable to risk another shot without seeing her target. Her hand found the cold metal of the document box, now empty, its contents scattered across the cave floor. Another flash, Marshall's revolver this time, the bullet going wide but providing enough light to see Eric grappling with her husband, a knife now gleaming in his hand. Sarah, the documents, Marshall shouted as he struggled to keep the blade from his throat. She hesitated only a moment. Marshall or the evidence, husband or justice, then dropped to her knees, feeling blindly for the papers on the rough stone floor. The sounds of battle continued nearby, both brothers evenly matched in their desperate struggle. Sarah's fingers closed around what felt like a leather-bound ledger, just as more gunfire erupted from deeper in the cave, Eric's men approaching rapidly. "Time to go," she called to Marshall, stuffing the ledger and what papers she could find into her jacket. A final flash of gunfire illuminated the chamber. Marshall standing now, blood streaming from a cut on his cheek, Eric nowhere to be seen. The brief lightning-like illumination revealed a second exit from the chamber, previously hidden in shadow. "He's headed for the North Passage." Marshall gasped, clutching his side where Eric's knife had found its mark. "The documents." "I have some of them," Sarah confirmed, moving to support him, "but we need to move. Now." They stumbled toward the passage they'd entered through the sound of approaching footsteps growing louder behind them. Marshall leaned heavily on Sarah, his breathing labored. "You're hurt," she observed as they navigated the narrow tunnel. "It's nothing," he lied, the dampness spreading across his shirt, telling a different story. "We need to get you to Clara." Sarah picked up their pace as much as Marshall's injury would allow. "She can—" They emerged from the cave mouth into chaos. Rain fell in sheets, now turning the hillside into a treacherous slope of mud and loose rock. Below, Clara had drawn her rifle and was engaged in a firefight with two of Eric's men, who had circled back to the horses. "There!" One of the men spotted them, swinging his rifle upward. Sarah pulled Marshall behind a rocky outcropping as bullets struck stone inches from their position. "We're trapped," Marshall said grimly, checking his revolver, 2 bullets remaining. Sarah surveyed their position, calculating. "Not yet, we're not." She pointed to a steep drainage channel cutting down the hillside, slick with rain and mud, but potentially navigable. "That's a 100-foot slide into unknown territory," Marshall objected. "Better than certain death here." Sarah met his gaze. "Trust me. Despite everything, the revelations in the cave, the years of separation, the festering wounds of misunderstanding," Marshall nodded without hesitation. "Always." Sarah fired her remaining bullets toward their attackers, forcing them to take cover, then pulled Marshall toward the drainage channel. Together, they slid into the narrow trough of mud and rock. What followed was a controlled fall, more than a descent, gravity taking over as they clung to each other. Mud and rainwater carrying them down the hillside at breakneck speed. Rocks tore at their clothing, branches whipped their faces, but the channel delivered them exactly where Sarah had aimed, behind the position where Clara was pinned down. They emerged at the bottom, caked in mud, but intact, directly behind one of Eric's men. Sarah didn't hesitate. She tackled him from behind, wrenching his rifle away and knocking him unconscious with his butt. The unexpected flank attack created the opening Clara needed. Her next shot found its mark, and the second gunman fell. "Marshall's hit," Sarah called to her sister as she helped her husband to his feet. Clara was beside them in an instant, already assessing the wound with professional efficiency. "Knife wound deep, but clean. We need to stop the bleeding." "No time," Marshall insisted, gesturing to the hillside where more of Eric's men had appeared at the cave entrance. "We need to move." Thomas and Ellie emerged from the trees, then both mud-splattered and breathing hard. "3 of them down on the west slope," Thomas reported, "but more coming." "The horses?" Sarah asked. "Still here," Clara confirmed, already leading Marshall toward their mounts. "But we can't outrun them all." Sarah made a swift decision. "Thomas, you and Ellie head east, create a false trail. Clara, take Marshall south towards Silver Springs, get him to a doctor, and then to Judge Harmon with the documents we recovered." "What about you?" Marshall asked, already knowing the answer from her expression. "I'm going after Eric." Sarah checked the rifle she'd taken, ensuring it was loaded. "He went north. Probably has a rendezvous planned." "Sarah, no." Marshall reached for her arm, his face pale from blood loss. "He's too dangerous." "So am I." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "He's wounded alone, and I have these." She patted her jacket where the recovered documents were secured. "Enough to ensure he can't restart elsewhere." "Let me come with you," Marshall insisted. "You'll bleed out before we find him." Sarah's voice softened. "I need you alive, Marshall. We have too much unfinished business for you to die on me now." The statement hung between them, not quite forgiveness, but a promise of possibility. Of a future conversation that could only happen if they both survived. Marshall searched her face, then nodded reluctantly. "Northridge has an old hunting cabin. It would be the most defensible position in this weather." "I know it," Sarah said. Of course she did. She had mapped every structure within 50 miles during her years of preparation. Clara finished securing a makeshift bandage around Marshall's torso. We need to go. Now. Quick goodbyes were exchanged, Thomas and Ellie already riding east, Clara helping Marshall onto his horse. Before they parted, Marshall caught Sarah's hand. 5 years ago, I made the wrong choice, he said, his voice low and urgent. I'm not making that mistake again. Find Eric, do what you have to do, but come back to me. Promise me. Sarah squeezed his hand, allowing herself one moment of vulnerability amid the chaos. I promise. Then she was mounting her own horse, turning north as the others scattered in their assigned directions. The rain continued to fall, washing away tracks almost as quickly as they were made, but Sarah didn't need tracks to find her quarry. She had been hunting the raven for 5 years. Now at last she would see his face when she pulled the trigger. The storm intensified as Sarah rode north, lightning splitting the sky in jagged bursts that briefly illuminated the rugged landscape. Each flash revealed the path ahead, a treacherous route through pine forest and rock formations leading toward the ridge Marshall had mentioned. The hunting cabin would be Eric's destination, the only shelter for miles and a defensible position from which to plan his next move. Sarah knew the structure well. She had cataloged it during her methodical exploration of the surrounding wilderness, noting its sturdy construction and isolated location. Perfect for a last stand. Her mare moved steadily beneath her, sensing her rider's determination despite the hostile conditions. Sarah rode with single-minded focus, her body leaning into the wind, rain plastering her hair to her face and soaking through her clothes. The physical discomfort barely registered. Her mind was consumed with calculation, strategy, the endgame now unfolding. Lightning flashed again and Sarah reined her horse to a sudden stop. There in the momentary illumination, a figure on horseback, perhaps half a mile ahead, struggling against the elements. Eric. She urged her mount forward at a careful pace, maintaining distance. Better to track him to his destination than risk confrontation in the open, where the advantage would go to whoever saw the other first in the storm's chaos. The documents she'd recovered crinkled inside her jacket as she rode partial vindication for 5 years of single-minded preparation. But it wasn't enough. The ledgers alone wouldn't bring the justice she sought. For that, she needed Eric Blackwood himself, preferably alive to stand trial but dead if necessary. After an hour of careful pursuit, the hunting cabin appeared silhouetted against the stormy sky, a solid, squat structure built by trappers decades earlier. Smoke curled from his chimney despite the rain confirming Eric's presence. He had arrived minutes before her, unaware of his shadow. Sarah dismounted at a safe distance, secured her horse in a sheltered copse, and approached on foot. The cabin had 2 entrances, front door and back, plus 2 windows on each side. In her mental catalog, she recalled that the western window had a broken latch, never repaired by the cabin's infrequent occupants. Moving silently despite the squelching mud beneath her boots, Sarah circled to the western side. The window was partially covered by a piece of oilcloth, a hasty attempt to keep out the rain, but still accessible. She listened intently, hearing movement inside, footsteps, the scrape of furniture, the clink of metal against metal. One person. Alone. Sarah drew her knife and carefully cut along the edge of the oilcloth, creating an opening just large enough to peer through. Inside, Eric moved about the cabin's single room, his movements precise despite the wound in his shoulder where Marshall's bullet had grazed him. He had lit a fire in the small stone hearth and was in the process of laying out papers on the rough wooden table, documents he had managed to salvage from the cave. His revolver lay within easy reach on the table's edge. Beside it, a bottle of whiskey already open. Sarah considered her options. She could attempt entry through the window, but the noise would alert him instantly. The doors would be similarly risky. A siege was possible, but reinforcements might arrive for either of them at any time. No, this needed to end now, cleanly and definitively. Drawing her rifle, Sarah moved to the front of the cabin and without preamble fired a single shot through the door. Inside, she heard a curse, the scrape of a chair, the metallic click of a revolver being cocked. That was a warning, Eric, she called over the storm. The next one finds its mark. Silence followed, then a low chuckle. Sarah Blackwood, I had a feeling you'd be the one to come after me. You have nowhere to go, she continued, positioning herself beside the door rather than in front of it. The passes will be flooded by morning. Federal marshals are already rounding up your associates. Concerned for my welfare, his voice carried easily despite the rain hammering on the cabin roof. How touching. I want you alive, Eric, to stand trial for what you've done. Another laugh. No, you don't. You want me dead for taking Marshall from you, for the years you spent alone, for your lost child. The mention of her unborn baby sent a surge of rage through Sarah, but she controlled it. Emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford in this final confrontation. You're right, she admitted, her voice steady. I've dreamed of killing you for 5 years, planned for it, prepared for it. Then why the offer? Why not just put a bullet through the window and be done with it? Sarah took a breath, surprised to find uncertainty where conviction had reigned moments before. Because Marshall still believes there's something in you worth saving, and I need to know if he's right. Silence fell again, broken only by the storm's fury and the crackle of the fire inside. When Eric finally spoke, his voice had lost its mocking edge. My brother always was an optimist. Even in war, even watching men torn apart by artillery, he believed in redemption. A heavy sigh. He was wrong then. He's wrong now. So prove him wrong, Sarah challenged. Come out, face me, end this like the cold-blooded killer you've become. Is that what you think I am? Something shifted in Eric's tone, a vulnerability Sarah hadn't expected. Just a killer. The Raven gang has left bodies across 3 territories. Women, children. Never children, Eric interrupted sharply. Never women unless they drew on us first. There were lines, Sarah, even at my worst. Lines, Sarah's voice rose. You let me believe my husband was dead. You took my sister. To draw you out, yes, but she was never in danger. Eric's footsteps approached the door. I gave strict orders. Not a hair on her head was to be harmed. Why, Sarah demanded. Why this elaborate game? If you wanted me, why not just come for me directly? A pause then, because I needed to know what you'd become, what grief had made of you. The footsteps stopped just on the other side of the door, and I found a woman who turned pain into power, who became a force of nature instead of a victim, just as I did. The parallel disturbed Sarah more than she cared to admit. We are nothing alike. Aren't we? Eric's voice was closer now, just inches away through the wooden door. Both of us transformed by their loss. Both of us meticulously planning our revenge. Both of us willing to sacrifice everything, including those we love, to achieve it. I never sacrificed anyone, Sarah insisted. Didn't you? Eric's question hung in the air. What about Clara? You used her as bait, knew my men would take her, planted that tracking device in her medical bag months ago. Sarah's blood ran cold. How did you? No, she could almost hear the smile in his voice. Because it's what I would have done. Because great minds, especially wounded ones, think alike. The realization that Eric had seen through her plan from the beginning shook Sarah's confidence. If he had known about the tracking device, why allow Clara to be taken at all? Why play along with Sarah's elaborate trap? It was never about the money, she said slowly, understanding dawning. The ransom demand, the kidnapping, it was about drawing Marshall out as well. Very good. Eric's approval made her skin crawl. I knew he was still alive, of course, known for years, allowed him to think he was successfully infiltrating my operation while I watched his every move. Ika, why not just kill him? Because he's my brother. The simple declaration held a wealth of complicated emotion. And because killing him would have been a mercy, I wanted him to suffer as I had suffered, to know what it feels like to lose everything. Sarah processed this revelation, her tactical mind recalibrating. So this whole confrontation, the mind, the documents, all of it was orchestrated by you from the beginning. Not entirely. Eric sounded almost regretful. Cooper was an unforeseen complication. His obsession with you made him unpredictable, dangerous. The cave-in was his doing, not mine. But you adapted, used it to your advantage. Of course, pride crept into Eric's voice. That's what survivors do, Sarah. They adapt, they overcome, they rise from the ashes stronger than before. A plan began to form in Sarah's mind, risky but potentially effective. Eric's ego, his need to prove his superiority over Marshall, could be leveraged. If you're so confident in your abilities, she challenged, why are you hiding behind that door? Face me. Prove you're the better Blackwood. You think I fear you, Eric laughed. I've been shot at by armies, hunted by lawmen across 3 territories. One widow with a rifle hardly inspires terror. This widow tracked you when the law couldn't. This widow dismantled your gang in a single day. Sarah infused her voice with contempt. This widow found you when you thought yourself cleverly hidden. The taunt struck true. The door latch clicked, and slowly the heavy wooden panel swung open. Eric Blackwood stood framed in the doorway, his revolver held casually at his side. The family resemblance to Marshall was striking, the same blue eyes, the same strong jawline, but where Marshall's features expressed warmth even in anger. Eric's face was a mask of cold control, his eyes calculating even as his lips curved in a smile. "Here I am, Sarah." He spread his arms slightly, the revolver still gripped loosely in his right hand. "Judge me as you will." Sarah kept her rifle trained on his chest, her finger light on the trigger. One squeeze and 5 years of planning would culminate in Eric Blackwood's death. Justice of a sort for Marshall's lost years, for her own suffering, for the faceless victims of the Raven Gang's brutality. Yet she hesitated, unsettled by the man before her. This was no monstrous outlaws from the wanted posters, no demonic figure from her nightmares. This was a man flesh and blood, complex and contradictory, capable of both calculated cruelty and, if his protection of Clara was to be believed, unexpected mercy. "Well," Eric prompted, his expression revealing nothing, "isn't this the moment you have been waiting for? The culmination of all your planning?" "Why did you do it?" Sarah asked, instead of pulling the trigger. "Not the how or the what, I understand those. But why turn against your family? Why destroy Marshall's life, your own legacy?" Something flickered in Eric's eyes, perhaps surprise at the question, or reluctant respect for her insight. "The war," he answered after a moment, his gaze dropping briefly to the ground. "Not just the fighting, but what came after, what it revealed about the world, about power, about justice." His mouth twisted in a bitter smile. "I watched good men die for nothing while corrupt men profited. Watched honor and sacrifice rewarded with poverty and indifference. So you became what you despised." "I became effective." Eric's eyes met hers again, challenging. "Our father and his associates built their fortune exploiting others, hiding behind respectability while running guns to whoever paid most. At least I was honest in my criminality." Rain continued to fall around them, soaking them both as they stood in this fragile standoff. Sarah on the porch steps, rifle unwavering. Eric in the doorway, revolver at his side, tension coiled in his stance despite his conversational tone. "And Marshall," Sarah pressed, "why punish him? He was honorable, decent. He was complicit." The sudden vehemence in Eric's voice startled her. He knew about father's dealings, benefited from them. That badge he wore so proudly, bought and paid for with blood money. "That's not true," Sarah insisted, though a seed of doubt took root. Marshall had never been forthcoming about his family's business, had changed the subject whenever she'd asked. "Isn't it?" Eric's smile was knowing. "Why do you think he agreed to my terms so readily? Not just to protect you, to protect himself. The ledgers implicated him too, Sarah. Not as deeply as others, but enough." The revelation staggered her. Could Marshall truly have been involved? Had she spent 5 years mourning then hunting? Based on a foundation of lies, Eric recognized her uncertainty and pressed his advantage. "He's not the paragon you believe him to be, Sarah. None of us are. That's the hardest truth to accept, that the line between good and evil isn't between people, but within them." "Philosophy doesn't justify what you've done," Sarah said, steadying her resolve and her aim. "Men are still dead. Lives are still destroyed." "True," Eric acknowledged with a slight nod. "And I'll answer for that someday. But not, I think, to you." In a fluid motion that belied his wounded state, Eric raised his revolver. Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger, but before either could fire, a third shot cracked through the storm. Eric staggered, blood blossoming across his shirt just below his heart. His revolver discharged harmlessly into the porch boards as he fell to his knees, confusion replacing the confidence in his expression. Sarah spun toward the source of the shot, her rifle swinging up defensively. Marshall Blackwood stood 30 yards away, a smoking revolver in his hand, blood soaking through the bandage, visible beneath his torn shirt. "No," Sarah cried, though whether to protest the shot or Marshall's presence she couldn't have said. Eric crumpled further, one hand pressed to his wound, the other still gripping his revolver. "Brother," he gasped, "your timing was always impeccable." Marshall approached slowly, his gait unsteady from his own wound. The rain had plastered his hair to his face, washing away some of the dust and blood from the earlier confrontation, but leaving him looking ghostly in the storm's gray light. "It's over, Eric." he said, his voice heavy with finality. You can't run anymore. Eric's laugh turned into a cough, blood speckling his lips. Wasn't planning to. Not this time. Sarah moved cautiously to Eric's side, keeping her rifle ready, but her attention divided between the wounded man and her unexpected husband. You should be with Clara, heading for Silver Springs. I couldn't let you face his alone, Marshall replied simply. Not again. Eric's eyes moved between them, a strange smile forming, despite his evident pain. The faithful husband returns. How romantic! Sarah knelt beside him, assessing the wound with grim expertise. The bullet pierced his lung. He's bleeding internally. Don't waste your concern, Eric murmured. We both know I was never walking away from this. You could have, Marshall countered, drawing closer. You could have taken the documents and disappeared, started over somewhere new. And live in exile, always looking over my shoulder. Eric shook his head slightly, wincing at the movement. No, this is better. Cleaner. Despite herself, Sarah felt a pang of something like sympathy for the dying man. In another life, under different circumstances, he might have been family, her brother-in-law, an uncle to the child she lost, perhaps even a friend. The documents, Eric said suddenly, his voice weaker. In my saddlebag. All of them. Marshall looked to Sarah in confusion. You said you recovered them. Some, she admitted. Not all. Take them to Harmon, Eric insisted, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. Finish what you started, brother. Clean the slate. A particularly violent cough racked his body, and Sarah instinctively supported him, easing him into a more comfortable position against the doorframe. The irony wasn't lost on her, comforting the man she'd hunted for years, whose death she had meticulously planned. Why? Marshall asked the question encompassing everything: Eric's crimes, his final surrender, his apparent change of heart. Eric's gaze found Sarah's something like admiration flickering in his pain-clouded eyes. She deserved to know the truth, about all of it. His attention shifted to his brother. And so did you. What truth? Sarah pressed, sensing the little time Eric had left. Cooper, Eric managed between labored breaths. He played us all, wanted you, for himself. The letters, the false evidence, all him. We know that now, Marshall said gently. Too late, but we know. Not all. Eric gripped Marshall's sleeve with surprising strength. Father's ledgers, Cooper added pages, made it seem you were involved. Understanding dawned on Marshall's face. You believed I was part of it, part of Father's operation. Eric nodded weakly. Why I couldn't forgive you. Thought you were just better at hiding it. The pieces fell into place for Sarah, the depth of betrayal that had set brother against brother, the carefully constructed lies that had destroyed so many lives. And the baby, she asked, her voice barely audible above the rain. Did you know about our child? Genuine regret clouded Eric's features. Not until too late. Would never have, if I'd known. His gaze shifted between them. Some sins can't be forgiven, but they can be acknowledged, Marshall said, his hand covering his brother's, where it still gripped his sleeve, and mourned. A ghost of a smile touched Eric's lips. Always were the better man. His breathing grew more labored, each word an effort. The cabin, northeast corner, loose floorboard. Everything you need to finish this. His gaze found Sarah's one last time, something like peace replacing the pain in his eyes. He never stopped loving you. Remember that. With those final words, Eric Blackwood, the Raven outlaw, betrayed brother, complex villain, drew his last breath, his hand falling limply from Marshall's grasp. For a long moment, the only sounds were the rain on the cabin roof and Marshall's ragged breathing. Sarah remained kneeling beside Eric's body, conflicted emotions churning beneath her carefully maintained composure. I was prepared to kill him, she finally said, her voice hollow. I've imagined this moment for years. And now, Marshall asked gently, now I don't know what to feel. Sarah looked up at her husband, the man she'd grieved, then hunted for, then found transformed. Relief, Justice, it all seems insufficient. Marshall extended his hand to help her up. After a moment's hesitation, she accepted it, allowing him to pull her to her feet. We should check the floorboard, he suggested. Whatever Eric left, it must be important. Together they entered the cabin, leaving Eric's body temporarily where it lay. The interior was sparse but dry, the fire still crackling in the hearth casting flickering light across the rough wooden walls. Sarah located the loose floorboard easily, her practiced eye noting the slight difference in color where it had been removed and replaced multiple times. Beneath it lay a small metal box similar to the one in the cave. Marshall opened it carefully, revealing not documents, but personal effects. A folded American flag, military insignia, a daguerreotype of Marshall and Eric in uniform before the war, and beneath these mementos, a sealed envelope addressed simply, Sarah. "It's for you," Marshall said, handing her the envelope with a puzzled expression. Sarah broke the seal with trembling fingers and unfolded the single page within. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, Eric's final communication. "Sarah, if you're reading this, our confrontation has ended, as I anticipated. I want you to know that despite everything, I never hated you. In another life, perhaps things would have been different. What Cooper did to all of us can never be undone, but it can be exposed. In the cave where Marshall hid his evidence, there is another chamber accessible only through a passage hidden behind the large stalagmite formation in the southwest corner. There you will find Cooper's real legacy ledgers detailing his own operation run parallel to ours, but far more brutal. The women and children attributed to the Raven Gang, that was Cooper's work, his attempt to blacken our name beyond redemption. This doesn't absolve me. My crimes are my own, and I accept whatever judgment awaits me. But Marshall deserves to know the full truth, as do you. The gold from the Blackwood mine, what little was extracted before the confrontation, is also hidden there. Use it for something better than we did. Perhaps for the child you lost, or for others who have suffered because of this feud. In another life, I might have been worthy of a woman like you. In this one, I can only offer this final truth as inadequate amends." Eric Sarah read the letter twice, then handed it silently to Marshall. As he absorbed its contents, his face registered shock, then grim understanding. "Cooper." He said the name a curse. "He died too quickly." "But his legacy doesn't have to stand," Sarah replied, finding new purpose in the midst of emotional chaos. "We can still expose everything, just as Eric wanted." Marshall folded the letter carefully. "Does it matter? After all this time, all this bloodshed, does the truth even matter anymore?" The question struck at the heart of Sarah's dilemma. 5 years of single-minded pursuit had culminated in this moment. Eric dead. Marshall returned, the promise of full disclosure within reach. Yet she felt hollow, uncertain of what victory even meant in the aftermath of so much loss. "Truth always matters," she finally answered. "Not just for justice, but for ourselves, for whatever comes next." Marshall studied her face in the firelight. "And what does come next, Sarah, for us?" The question hung between them, weighted with 5 years of separation, misunderstanding, and pain. Sarah looked at this man, once the center of her world, then her greatest loss, now a stranger with a familiar face, and found herself unable to provide the simple answer he sought. "I don't know," she admitted. "Too much has happened. We've both changed too much to simply pick up where we left off." Pain flickered across Marshall's features, but he nodded in acceptance. "I understand. I don't have the right to expect." "But," Sarah interrupted, surprising herself with the words that followed, "perhaps we can start something new. Not a continuation, but a beginning." Hope kindled in Marshall's eyes. "I'd like that." The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses, multiple riders closing in on the cabin. Marshall's hand moved instinctively to his revolver, but Sarah placed her hand over his. "It's Clara," she said with certainty. "And Thomas, if they found each other." Sure enough, Clara's voice soon called out through the rain. "Sarah Marshall." Sarah moved to the door, stepping carefully past Eric's body. "Here, we're here." Clara peered through the downpour, relief evident on her face as she dismounted. Behind her came Thomas and Ellie, plus 2 unfamiliar men whose badges identified them as federal marshals. "Thank God," Clara breathed, embracing her sister before taking in the scene, Eric's body. Marshall's blood-soaked bandage, the grim determination on both their faces. "It's over then." "Not quite," Sarah answered, "but close. There's more evidence to recover and Cooper's true nature to expose." One of the marshals stepped forward. "Mrs. Blackwood, I'm Marshal Harmon. Your sister found us on the road to Silver Springs. Said you had evidence regarding the territorial corruption ring we've been investigating." "More than you know," Marshall confirmed, emerging from the cabin with the metal box and Eric's letter. "My brother left us quite a legacy." As the group moved inside to escape the rain, Sarah stepped aside, taking a moment alone on the porch. The storm was beginning to abate, patches of clear sky visible between the clouds, stars emerging in the growing darkness. 5 years of single-minded purpose had culminated in this moment, not with the clean, righteous vengeance she had imagined, but with something more complex and uncertain. Eric was dead, yet she felt no triumph. Marshall was alive, yet their future remained unwritten. Justice would be served, though not in the straightforward manner she had envisioned. Clara appeared beside her, a gentle hand on her arm. "You all right?" Sarah considered the question, really considered it for the first time in years. "I will be," she decided, "eventually." "He still loves you," Clara said softly. "Marshall, it's in every look, every word." "I know." Sarah turned to her sister, allowing her mask of strength to slip just slightly. "But I'm not the woman he loved anymore, and he's not the man I married." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Clara suggested. "The people you were then couldn't have survived what you both endured. Maybe the people you've become are stronger, better equipped for whatever comes next." Sarah glanced back through the cabin window where Marshall was deep in conversation with the marshals, his face animated with purpose, despite his obvious exhaustion and pain. "Maybe," she conceded, "but we'll need time, space to figure out who we are now, both separately and together if that's possible." Clara smiled, squeezing her sister's arm. "Time you have. The war took 5 years from you. The peace can give them back." The simple wisdom in her sister's words sparked something in Sarah. Not happiness, not yet, but possibility. The foundation of a future not defined by vengeance or grief, but by choice, by healing, by intentional rebuilding. "Come on," Clara urged gently. "Marshall Harmon wants to leave at first light. We should rest while we can." Sarah cast one last look at the clearing sky, at the wilderness that had both hidden and revealed so many truths. Then she turned toward the cabin's warm light, toward Marshall's waiting gaze, toward whatever uncertain future lay ahead. Not an ending, she decided, a beginning. There's a certain stillness that comes after a storm, when the dust settles and the blood dries and all that remains is the reckoning. Sarah Blackwood's vengeance cost her 5 years of meticulous planning, countless sleepless nights, and the innocent woman she once was. It gave her back a husband she'd buried, a truth she never expected, and a strength forged in the unforgiving crucible of grief. The raven is dead. Cooper lies forgotten in an unmarked grave. But the price of justice is never paid in full. It lingers in the nightmares that still wake them both, in the way Marshall's hand sometimes reaches for a weapon, when a door slams too loudly, in the way Sarah's eyes still scan every room for exits, for angles, for threats. Yet in Silver Springs, something unexpected blooms among the wreckage, not the passionate love of their youth, but something weathered and resilient. Two survivors who've seen the darkness in the world and in themselves, who choose each day to build rather than destroy. Perhaps that's the truest revenge, to find meaning after meaningless loss, to reclaim a future when the past tried to bury you, to love again when hate would be easier. In the end, isn't that what separates the living from the ghosts? Not the absence of scars, but the courage to carry them forward.